Welcome to Jersey Rules. This is our podcast where we explore issues facing New Jersey residents and beyond. And we are absolutely thrilled today to be talking about the Freedom to Read legislation. It is now law, signed by Governor Murphy last month, and it is really about fighting for access to books and ideas. So I'm joined by Assemblywoman Mitchelle Drulis. I think I can call you I can call you a newbie still. You're yes. Relatively new in the legislature and already a rock star representing the 16th District. This has been a fantastic piece of legislation that you were able to shepherd through 16th District in what is Central Jersey, which does officially exist thanks to other legislation that we have passed. We also have Martha Hickson, who is, we'll get to this a little later. She is now a film star, but we know her as a very dedicated librarian, recently retired. You've been recognized by numerous organizations for your work in this space in terms of access, and also Central Jersey is where you spend a lot of your time.
That's correct.
So great to have you here.
Thank you.
I want to just talk very generally first. I personally love books. I'm a big reader. I'm assuming the two of you are as well. What book resonates with you? What book really had an impact in your life?
So for me, the book that I think had the biggest impact was actually The Diary of Anne Frank. And the reason for that is I read it as part of our school required reading when I was in about 4th or 5th grade. It was in elementary school. And we discussed this book. And, you know, I was young then, and World War II had seemed very far away. It wasn't something that I, as a child, really fully understood. But then the school that I was at, they brought in Holocaust survivors after we read the book. And we sat down at lunch tables, and we were each assigned a Holocaust survivor that we got to interview and ask them questions. And I remember the woman who I was paired up with taking my hand and touching the numbers that were on her wrist. And it was just, in that moment, even though I was very young, it was so powerful to actually see those numbers, to touch them, to talk to her, and to know that she had survived that atrocity. And I think that had just a profound impact on me and shaped my vision for how people should be treated and how others should be respected. And so I think that reading that book and having that experience just really changed me as a person.
Lovely story. How about you, Martha?
For me, as I look back, especially in my young reading life, I've loved reading since I learned how. But the book I read and reread as a kid was Harriet the Spy by Louise Fitzhugh. And I loved that book because Harriet was a smart, funny, independent girl who marched to her own drummer and just didn't give a damn. And I hope I have a little bit of Harriet inside me as an adult woman. But the interesting thing about both of our books is that over the years, both The Diary of Anne Frank and Harriet the Spy have been challenged. Attempts to remove it, especially in this current era. They're still going after The Diary of Anne Frank for sexual content, and there's a graphic adaptation of the book in which there's an image of Anne walking down a lane, and there are classical Greek statues, which of course are nude, so they're going after it for nudity. In terms of Harriet, they go after it for things like the fact that she wears, not traditionally female clothes. She's sort of a tomboy. So there's just no deviation from any kind of societal norms permitted in the current book banning era.
So you've been a librarian. You were a librarian for years. How did this book banning movement start? Why are these books that I would venture to guess, something like Diary of Anne Frank, a lot of children have read, how do we get to this point where in New Jersey legislation had to be drafted to protect the freedom to read?
Well, first of all, censorship is nothing new. It's been a mainstay throughout history. And one of the things I know from looking at this from a long lens is that these types of waves, we're in a wave now, tend to be cyclical. And the pattern seems to be such that after a conservative election come conservative ideas and conservative morals that are then attempted to be imposed on the population at large. We saw this in the early 80s after Reagan's inauguration, for instance. What happened this time, I believe, is in 2020, we all recall the results of that presidential election. And things didn't go as planned for those on the conservative side of the political spectrum. That then resulted, in my view, in various attempts to keep the band together by finding issues that they could coalesce around until the 2024 election. Books, reading, schools happened to be some low-hanging fruit that they could coalesce around, and they started attacking books and libraries.
Assemblywoman, how did this issue come into the spotlight for you? Why did you find it important to work on? And how are you able to kind of win over the advocates and the supporters you needed to advance the legislation?
So before I was elected, I was following Martha's story. I live in Hunterdon County. I have my mom. My daughter's not at the high school where she was librarian, but in a neighboring district. So we had, through the papers, through mutual friends, had heard about what you were going through, and it was absolutely awful. The threat she was getting, the way that she was attacked. And I think that among a lot of the moms, because at that point I hadn't been elected, there was a feeling that we need to do something, but there was also a feeling of helplessness too, because what can we do? We can show up at Board of Ed meetings, we can, vote, we can do these things. But when I got elected, I knew that this was something that I wanted to work on. And I was very, very lucky to have a district mate in Senator Zwicker who had already started working on this. So one of the first things I said to him when I got elected is, please let me champion this in the Assembly. It takes 2 houses to get this to the governor's desk. And this is such an important issue. As, a parent, I felt like this was something that was near and dear to me, and it was happening in my own county. And so I wanted to make sure that we got it through both houses and that it was something that we could get to the governor's desk. So the senator and I worked very closely to get this done so that librarians did not have to go through what you went through, because you have been a champion and you have been such a person of strength dealing with all you've dealt with. But she shouldn't have had to deal with it.
I want to talk about these threats, and I want to just read something. When this legislation was signed into law by the governor, you were quoted as saying, "After 3 years of harassment, I can finally celebrate." So let's dive into what exactly personally was going on in your life, in the lives of other librarians.
In my life was turned upside down on September 28th, 2021, when a small group of parents arrived at a school board meeting at the North Hunterdon Voorhees School District to complain about 2 books, Gender, Queer, and Lawn Boy, and also to complain about the librarian who stocked those books in the library, me. And in the course of doing that, they labeled me by name a pornographer, pedophile, and groomer of children in a school board meeting that has since been viewed nearly 6,000 times on YouTube. That false, defamatory label has followed me now for 3.5 years. And there is a certain portion of the population, thankfully small, but for whom those words are very triggering, they cannot let go, and they will continue to lob them at me and other librarians. From that night, the same group of people added more books to the pile. It turned into 5 altogether, and then eventually they added a 6th. And that then started launching hate mail to me at my school email address, including the most vile and derogatory terms that can be leveled against a woman, one of which starts with the letter C. I'm sure it's familiar to anyone listening, coming to me at my school email address.
Were these from New Jersey residents or outside?
New Jersey residents, although I did get some from across the United States as well. As I started talking about this situation and appearing in larger news outlets, I did a piece for CNN.com, for instance, at one point in the journey. Then I started getting hate mail from across the United States. I'm accosted on the street. My car has been vandalized. I basically have lived in fear for 3.5 years. I don't go anywhere without my husband. He's here with me today. And I know other librarians across the country. In fact, I was with 6 of them this weekend who've experienced the same and or worse.
Well, I'm sorry to hear this, and we have followed what's happened to you, and obviously the Assemblywoman has as well. How does your legislation address some of these issues, the issues that Martha went through, and also the idea, and if you could explain, if you go into a library, you're not forced to take any particular book, right? If you're a child, you're usually there with an adult, or maybe it's a sibling. So if you could kind of explain what the bill does on the very personal side for librarians, and how that kind of makes sense that it's okay to walk in and nobody is handing you a book to take.
So I think that this legislation, this law, is it's very common sense. So what it does is it recognizes that librarians are highly educated, that they've spent an incredible amount of time working towards their degrees to become librarians, and that they have a skill set that allows them to choose books that are developmentally appropriate. And they understand what that means, to be developmentally appropriate, age appropriate, grade appropriate. And because of their high education levels, particularly around library science, we have to trust our librarians that, they understand what is appropriate to be in our public schools and our public libraries. And this legislation, when it comes to librarians, says that as long as they're making a good faith effort, that they cannot be attacked, they cannot be persecuted for doing their job. So it gives them that protection. What this legislation also does is, if a parent feels that a book is not age or grade developmentally appropriate for a student in a public school library, there's a way for a parent to bring that book forward, and it goes through a process. So it's no longer one parent coming in and saying, I don't like this book, I don't want my kid to read it, so therefore no other child should be allowed to read it. And that was happening in many cases, where one parent, for whatever reason, was deciding that no one should read this book. So this puts together a very well thought out system where parents' rights are still protected. It puts together a committee and where each school district adopts this policy with this committee, and it includes parents on that committee. So parents' voices are heard, they are considered, and it also includes librarians and other professionals who deal with books on a regular basis to come together and look at the book and see, is this developmentally appropriate? Should this be on our shelves? And so that committee of people who understand what should be in a book, at what age, what grade, or in our public libraries, can then look at the book as a whole and decide, should it be on that shelf or not? So it really gives the community a voice. It's people from that community, whether it's the school community or the municipality, to then make sure that the books on our shelves are reflecting the communities that they're in.
And speaking of communities, I think it's important to note regarding the bill that one facet of the bill requires libraries, both school and public, to adopt and publish the policies that they use for selection criteria, how to materials make it into the library, and policies for challenging a book. How is it that a community member can raise objections? There will be guidance provided by the Commissioner of Education in the state library, but those policies are up to each local board. So the policies are being developed and managed locally. This is not, a big brother, state ideas being imposed on local schools and local public libraries.
And certainly school boards have public meetings where people can go and let their voices be heard. When this bill was going through our committees in the Assembly, we heard a lot of voices against, for. Assemblywoman, were you surprised by the intensity of some of the testimony?
I don't know that surprised would be the word I would use. More expected. Having seen what Martha went through at the school board meetings, we expected that there would be the same level of intensity on both sides. A lot of individuals who felt that, and rightfully so, I believe, that these book bans were targeting their communities, felt very passionate about coming out and sharing their stories. And I really appreciated, we had students there, we had adults there who shared how books had an impact on their life, and that, they felt seen and heard in books. And, they wanted to make sure that these books that had impacted them were not removed from library shelves. And so we also had, people who were opposed to the bill who, were trying to grandstand at the committee meetings. So we expected that as well. And so we knew it was going to be a long committee meetings with lots of passion on both sides as well.
This is not a New Jersey issue, it's a national issue. And we actually had a national film crew here for part of that testimony. Martha just got back from the Sundance Film Festival, where her story is part of a film that will be released later, The Librarians. Correct. And you got a lot of attention out there. This film has gotten a lot of attention. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, I'm very eager. In fact, later today, the audience votes for the films at Sundance will come out, and I'm eager to see whether The Librarians gets to the podium for documentaries. But it's directed by Kim Snyder and produced by Janique Robillard, both of whom received Academy Award nominations last week for their short documentary called Death by Numbers. So we were in extremely capable hands in terms of documenting our experience. Going to Sundance was the first time that any of the librarians featured in the film, there were 7 of us at Sundance, had seen the film in its entirety, along with its executive producer, Sarah Jessica Parker, who was out there with us. She too saw it for the first time. Our stories have been captured very faithfully. We see many shots of the people from the other side as well, expressing their views and their opinions. And I think their words speak for themselves, as does their behavior. And audiences were, I don't think it's an exaggeration to say, shocked. When the movie, at each screening, when the film ended, audiences leapt to their feet. We got standing ovations, and people were coming up to us, some in tears. They could not believe what they had witnessed, and that this was happening in the United States of America. They all wanted to know what they could do to help. They expressed their admiration for our strength, although I didn't feel strong through this whole process. But it was very gratifying to finally have our story told, our story witnessed in a big way. And I'm very excited to see what this film is going to do when it goes more broadly. It will be available to the general public in the fall on PBS on the Independent Lens series.
That's amazing to hear. So I'm very glad that you were able to be featured in this film. We started in the beginning talking about your favorite books, but just kind of for the record, Martha, Tick off a couple of books that people want to ban that would be familiar to most of us.
I don't know, here's the thing. I don't know how familiar those books would be to most of you, because it's the same list of books from state to state to state that they're going after. And I was surprised when this first started at North Hunterdon that the first two they went after were Genderqueer by Maya Kobabe and Lawn Boy by Jonathan Evison. Two fairly obscure titles in my collection. They're now notorious across the United States because they've made it into the Moms for Liberty playbook. So there is a list that they're going after. Others include Me and Earl and the Dying Girl by Jesse Andrews, Beloved by Toni Morrison, This Book is Gay by Juno Dawson. I could go on, but it's the same list of titles from state to state to state. Oh, and Tango Makes Three is another one. The book about two male penguins who hatch an egg. It's a picture book.
Over the next year, we'll see this law being really put into place, implemented. Do you think the arguments are still going to be there, or do you think this will mitigate? Does it incite or mitigate what we've heard in the past?
I hope it mitigates it. I mean, that was our goal, so that we could let our school boards get back to what they need to do, and that's worry about educating our kids and kind of slow down on all this ideological banter.
I mean, it sounds like a win for parents' rights either way, because wherever you stand on the issue, you have a voice.
I'm hoping that this slows down the attempt to ban books in New Jersey, because there's a process in place now. So if you really feel that a book is inappropriate, there's a process you can follow, and you can fill out the form in your local district, and you don't have to, go to the school board meetings with, your big signs and start attacking education professionals. Fill out the form and see if, the committee agrees with you.
Martha, what role do librarians play in today's society after you've gone through this?
I would say our role is the same as it ever was. We are stewards of information. Whether that information comes in the form of a book, a database, a library program, even AI. We're there to kind of shepherd people toward the information they need and want. If you think of like when you're hungry, you go to a grocery store and you're hoping you're entering a facility that has a wide variety of foods, some of which you might be allergic to, but you choose to stay away from. But that wide variety is well organized so that you can select the ingredients that you need to make the best meal. Librarians are doing the same thing in a library for the world of ideas. We are the grocery store for the world of ideas.
I love that analogy. Assemblywoman, any thoughts from you on how we move forward from here with the conversation, and is the message that local voices do matter, but one local voice can't shut out another?
It is. Our communities here, especially here in New Jersey, are diverse places. We have people from all different backgrounds, all different religions, all different ideas, and there was a quote from Jimmy Carter where he said, "We're not a melting pot, we're a mosaic," and I think that's beautiful, and that's what we are. We want our kids to learn to think critically. We want them to hear different voices so that they can make informed decisions about things, and we want people to be able to hear their own stories reflected in the books on our shelves, and I think that this will allow that to happen, and I think that it's a good thing for New Jersey to make sure that our kids have access to information, that as they're growing that they can go to a library and get answers to questions that they may have. I think it's absolutely important for our kids and for our communities to be able to access libraries in our state.
Well, before we wrap things up, I have to ask you what you're reading now, right? We have all these books in the library, but what's on your nightstand, Martha?
Just finished The Friday Afternoon Club by Griffin Dunn. I'm about to open A Gentleman in Moscow by Amor Towles. And I just got a notification from the Ocean County Library that I can pick up my hold for On Tyranny by Timothy Snyder this afternoon. So Gentleman in Moscow and On Tyranny are next up.
Very nice. Assemblywoman?
So as you can imagine, I don't have as much time for reading as I would like.
Absolutely.
But my husband did for Christmas, as one of my holiday presents, purchase for me Promise Me Dad by President Biden. I recently lost my mom, and it's a story of hope and of moving on. So it was, I think, appropriate for where I am right now. And so I'm looking forward to really diving into the book, but I have to say it's been over a month since the holidays and I haven't opened it yet.
But you ended on such a beautiful point, because that's what books do for us. They can give us strength when we need it. They can give us entertainment. They can educate us. So I thank both of you for what you've done to keep the doors of libraries wide open and filled with books for people to choose in a way that works for them. Thank you so much for being with us today on Jersey Rules.
Thank you.